Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. So the population has more or less exploded at this village overnight. In fact, I have discovered the secret to breeding villagers, and it's very, very simple actually. It's basically what you might expect from this update. It's basically the village breeding rules that applied before, except instead of doors, it is beds. Basically, the villagers need to be traded with a couple of times, or they need to be well fed in order for them to be willing to breed, and then you will find tons of kids popping up as soon as you place down enough beds for them to sleep in. We covered this briefly in the video the other day, but I wanted to clarify those mechanics right out of the gate. To get villagers to breed, all you need is food or trading and beds. That is literally the entire equation right there. And so what you might expect from a villager breeder is just to have a couple of adult villagers who are willing to breed, either through food or through trading, next to a whole bunch of beds, and then find some way of removing the offspring from the area as soon as they are born. Because basically once they are born, they will target one of these beds and say, that is my bed, and they will basically return to that bed for the rest of their lives, including their adult life. I don't think they pick a new bed when they've grown up. I think they still return to the same home bed. And in order to get the villagers away from the beds enough that they will forget about them, it's quite a distance. To my knowledge, it is a pretty long distance, something like 80 blocks or so, probably even more. So if you wanted to make a villager breeder in this update, I recommend setting up some very long water streams and getting the villagers away from your village breeding area, because even with a couple of villagers in a pod in the same way that you had it previously, you can start an infinite villager breeder. It just takes a decent amount of distance away from the beds where the young villagers will target them and claim them as their own. You will also notice there are a substantial number of iron golems strutting around at this point. There are a total of 6, and if you can only see 5 right now, that's because there is another one that got over the wall, and I've had to make a couple of changes, a few improvements to the way this whole area is structured on the inside, because the baby villagers had a habit of getting out. They tend to run around in groups as though they're playing tag, and they will run after and track iron golems. And because of the larger hitbox of the iron golem, this one was able to get over the wall walking from like a bush or something over the top of the wall, and now he's stuck out here and he can't get back inside. I've tried moving him in, but the thing about iron golems as opposed to the villagers is that they don't track to any specific objects. They just kind of wander around a little bit aimlessly, and the ones in here seem to try and stay close to the center of the village where all of these villagers' beds are, but for the most part they are kind of aimless, and so I can't just open a hole in the wall and expect that guy to walk back through. Whereas in the occasions where I've had young villagers and even adult villagers outside of the perimeter wall, as soon as it gets to nighttime, they all start to run back towards their beds. It's actually kind of likely that if you displace a villager on the outside of a large perimeter like this, there will be a certain event during the day that will encourage them to come back in. Not to mention meeting times and workstations. Now let me head down into the meeting area, because as you can see, we have a bell now. I was able to trade this from some of my blacksmith type villagers, anyone with an apron, so Montague has one as a toolsmith. I'm pretty sure the weaponsmith also trades one. Basically anybody who works with metal, so the weaponsmith, the armorer, or the toolsmith will all be able to trade you a bell, and that will act as a focal point for the village, as a meeting point. They are not necessary for villagers to gossip, which seems to be a lot of people's impression of what a bell does. It's actually not necessary at all, but what it does is provide a designated meeting point for them to come at the end of the day and gossip. And what I've done is place this one over here because I wanted to breed more swamp villagers. You'll notice that this is the only corner of this area which is actually in the swamp biome, and I wanted to make sure that the population here kind of evened out between the swamp costume villagers and the jungle costume villagers. So placing the meeting point down here was the ideal way to do that, because all of the gossip and all of the breeding takes place down here at meeting times. And then at the end of the day, as always, they all run towards their beds and decide to call it a night. This guy over here seems to be a little bit too far away to get caught up in the scramble for a bed. Do you want to come out of that corner, my friend? There you go. He's off. And as you can see, they will track to beds from quite a distance. I think that guy's AI was just taking a second or two to catch up. But even from miles away, even from, like, well, probably not literal miles, but even from, 60 or 70 blocks away, they will all find their ways back to this little campsite over here. And perhaps the funniest part of this is that the iron golems will still walk around during the night, and they will actually almost push some of these villagers out of a bed, at which point they will decide to choose a different bed because that one seems to be disturbed. So it's actually possible that Montague has been pushed out of my bed, and I think I can sleep in my own bed for once. So during that morning meeting that they have at the beginning of the day, they don't really seem to go over to the bell at all. They mostly seem to hang around their houses, and these beds basically count as their houses at this point. So you'll find them all milling around here until the workday starts. And once the workday begins, you'll notice them almost universally running over to this area that we've set up over here. We've got a few lecterns here for the librarians. We've got, of course, the composter down there by the farm for Capulet the farmer. But aside from these sections here and this stone cutter for the stonemason, all of the other workstations have been placed down here. Once again, trying to get more villagers over to the swamp area. But we now have a villager that corresponds with each of these professions. So every single profession is accounted for. And I've been enjoying doing those little kind of intro cards for all of the villagers and stuff, but there's just going to be too many of them to do in this episode, so I'm sorry if the production value dips a little bit, but it was taking me a little bit of time to do those as an extra feature. Now, there are a bunch of professions that we should go over, considering that they are all relatively new, or at least they are new to this update as far as their appearance goes. There is one that is absolutely new and fresh for 1.14, and that is the stonemason, who will start off by trading you clay balls for emeralds, which doesn't seem like a great trade until you realize that the only reason you got clay balls in the first place was to trade it for bricks, and they have a better brick trade. So basically, this guy can either do the smelting for you if you don't have a discount, or you can trade them clay balls and they will give you more bricks in return, which is pretty great. After that, it seems like they have a bunch of different trades for stone and stone bricks. These guys further down the line will also trade you for quartz, which is great because it makes quartz renewable. Not the quartz items though, just the quartz blocks and quartz pillars will show up in mason trades, but that's still really valuable to have, especially on multiplayer servers where getting quartz from the nether might be a little bit difficult. You've already met a lot of these villagers the other day, but moving down to this work site, we have a bunch of new folks. Now, over here at the smoker, of course, we have a butcher who has much lower meat trades than butchers used to. They've got like 7 raw pork chops instead of, I think, about 12 or 13 was the average. And I could get 1 raw rabbit right now and trade it for an emerald because of that discount from 4. That's pretty good, to be honest. The reason I have a lot of coal in my inventory, by the way, is because each of my blacksmith type villagers will trade coal as their first trade. And I basically fortuned a ton of coal because I can get it renewably from my wither skeleton farm, and decided to do a bunch of trading to level these guys up to see what they had available to them. That's how we got hold of the bell. The bell cannot be crafted. It is only available as a trade from blacksmith type villagers, or you have to steal one from an existing village. So not exactly all that easy to get hold of a bell in the early stages. The cauldron over here will mark out this guy as a leather worker who I haven't done a great deal of trading with yet, but he's already selling dyed leather pants, which is something villagers never used to do. So kind of cool, and I imagine there will be a lot of other leather stuff in their inventory in future. If we end up getting them beyond the novice level, they will probably have leather armor, possibly even with enchants. Over here we have a Fletcher who is, as usual, selling stuff like arrows for emeralds, and he'll also grind up gravel into flint if you want to, which is the worst trade imaginable in my opinion, but I expect further down the line he will have a few interesting things for you. Now, the cleric actually has a better rotten flesh trade than it was possible to get in Minecraft 1.13 and earlier. Specifically, he started off with a 32 rotten flesh trade, which is already... Oh, that's the Fletcher using the fletching table. That was a really fun sound. I thought I was being shot at, though, so it's a little bit paranoid. Okay, so like I was saying, the rotten flesh trade here used to, like, the lowest rotten flesh trade you used to be able to get is 36. So he's already starting at 32, and he's lowered that to 28 because of the zombie villager situation, the fact that we got discounts for basically every zombie villager I cured. He's also trading much less gold for emeralds, which is nice because giving away a ton of gold to these guys, unless you had a gold farm, always seemed like a bit of a tall order. Further down the line, we could expect the clerics to have their usual kind of trades, stuff like bottles of enchanting and that kind of thing, but they still trade lapis lazuli and redstone dust, which is lovely to have as part of the renewable trades here. Even though lapis isn't as necessary necessary for blue dye anymore because we have cornflowers. Still great to see it there for enchanting purposes, if nothing else. Moving on, this chap over here who has a cap kind of similar to the fisherman's, but he's got a white coat here. This guy is a shepherd. He is currently trading us for brown wool and grey wool, and that's not exactly a trade I'm going to take advantage of right now, but of course now we're farming all of those sheep automatically over at my spawn area. We could probably come back with a little bit of brown and grey wool if he wanted to trade those. They will typically trade the colours of wool that are available on natural sheep, so you won't find them asking for blue wool or cyan or red or anything because those colours don't spawn naturally. It might on occasion be possible for them to ask for pink wool, I don't really know, but mostly they will ask for white, grey, black, and brown. Those are the colours of sheep that typically spawn naturally in the world. The pink ones are rare, so who knows if they will show up or not, but then further down the line you'll expect him to sell shears and sell various other shearing related things. He'll probably sell you some coloured wool for emeralds. Moving on, this is the fisherman. Of course, the fisherman has the typical trades for fishing rods and string, and he will cook cod for you. I've only got 5 raw cod on me right now, so maybe later. The guy over here with the monocle is a cartographer, and he traded me an empty map of this area for me to find out that this area is very much not in the center of a map, so I probably need to trade a few more from him, but a reasonable price, and he's also giving us a decent paper trade as well. 20 paper for an emerald is not the best I've seen, but it's also not too bad either. And I've spent the entire workday talking, so everyone's moving over for the morning meeting, but much like the other professions we covered the other day, these folks will restock their trades at their workstations twice a day. Usually it starts off when the workday starts, but then usually about halfway through the workday, kind of where the sun is at its midpoint, you will find them restocking around then. It's a bit random, so it takes a little bit of time, but you will find them doing it around that time. And hopefully some other villagers will come in from other parts of the village to attend today's meeting as well. And you can see that some of those baby villagers will now have grown up and be unemployed villagers. We have run out of employment for these guys because I haven't put down too many more workstations aside from one each of the basics, but that is great. It's so good to see a thriving village over here, and look at the amount of people we've been able to get just from those 5 zombie villagers we originally cured. And it would be possible to reach a population like this with just 2 villagers as long as they are well fed and had some beds, but having 5 of them definitely kick-started the population here in a big way. And during these afternoon meetings is when you will find them deciding whether or not it is necessary to spawn an iron golem, which is usually dependent on whether or not there is an iron golem in the proximity of the village, and I don't know if it counts just based on a radius based on the villagers themselves, because as you can see they seem to keep spawning them because they think they need them, and there are already 5 or 6 patrolling the village as is. So sometimes the gossip they're sharing is a little bit unnecessary, but in this case it looks like they haven't decided to spawn a golem, which is probably a sensible thing for right now. I've also, as you can see, been able to tame one of the cats that wandered into the village, and by the way, the collar here is dyed. You can't really see the fact that it's wearing a collar, but that's because I dyed it white to match the cat. If I had some other kind of dye, like if I grab a poppy from over here, you'll be able to see that if I turn this dye into red, you can just dye the color of the cat's collars in much the same way that you can a dog. For example, bam, there you go, now got a red collar. Oh, how pretty. And that has actually started us on a train of cat taming that we will do in a future episode, because this complete catalog advancement has been added and it requires you to tame all 11 of the cat variants that you will find wandering into villages. Before we move on, I do want to find one of the librarians, and I can't remember if it's this guy. No, that's our original librarian, the one who had Fortune 3. Is it the other swamp librarian who has it? There is a librarian who I've already been able to get a mending trade out of. There we go, yes. A mending trade for 3 emeralds. And this is not the lowest I've seen it, of course. There are mending trades that you can get for a single emerald. Naturally, we have a massive discount on books because of curing zombie villagers in the first place, but this guy is actually trading mending for a very, very low price. Because I've traded with him enough before, and because this master level has been achieved, he's actually giving me a decent discount. He's shared gossip with some of the other villagers to say, hey, this guy is worth trading with. He's a nice guy. And so we have a ludicrously low mending trade. Now, I got that mending trade in much the same way that you saw me do the other day, where I was basically breaking a lectern, watching the villager's job disappear, then placing the lectern again to have him take the job of librarian once again and replenish that trade. So you can do this to re-roll the trades as much as you want until you get a decent low mending trade. And that one would have started out at 22 emeralds, but I think the lowest basic price for a trade for a book is about 10 emeralds. It might be a little bit lower. So in theory, you could get a mending trade very easily and then reduce it to such a low price as a result of trading with them regularly or doing other good deeds for the villagers that you would get mending books for a single emerald, which is, quite frankly, a little bit strange. But I'm going to buy some bookshelves off of him. And here is another very broken trade when it comes to librarians, because you will get 3 bookshelves here for 2 emeralds apiece, which is really not all that much, and then he will trade 1 book for me with 1 emerald. Now remember, if you break a bookshelf using something that doesn't have silk touch, like my fist, for example here, you will end up getting 3 books back. So essentially, he's selling us a bookshelf for 2 emeralds, and we can sell the contents of that bookshelf back to him for 3 emeralds. So if you want to farm emeralds, librarians are a pretty safe bet now. More so than just having a decent paper trade, you can actually game the system a little bit that way. This guy here is also selling me a book for an emerald, so there we go. That's 6 emeralds, nice and easy, and this apprentice librarian gets updated to a journeyman and has a quick charge. Yes, okay, good. I really wanted quick charge because I haven't really been able to explore that with a crossbow yet. As you can see, my crossbow has piercing, but not quick charge. So I'm definitely taking advantage of that. 8 emeralds for a quick charge book? Are you kidding? Yes, please. I will take one of those, absolutely. Now, I don't have an anvil around here with me to actually apply that, but we will get to that a little bit later. While I'm here, I'm going to trade a little bit of coal to the weaponsmith as well, till that trade locks up, and then we get to see the trade unlocking. At a certain point of the day, probably around midday, he'll revisit his grindstone and restock the trade. But for now, we can just hang back and maybe trade with some of the other guys as well. This guy's coal trade is down to 8, which is really nice. And as you can see, that gives him a nice healthy dose of experience towards his next level. Where has the toolsmith gone? We haven't seen Montague the toolsmith for a couple of days, actually. I wonder where he's got to. I have a feeling he might be stuck somewhere. That does occasionally tend to happen. These guys are all the unemployed villagers who are running around as kids before. I wonder where Montague has gone. That's a concern. I hope he hasn't run foul of any zombies or anything like that, but he shouldn't do within the perimeter of this village. I even took the precaution of lighting up the river a little bit with lanterns, just because there was a possibility of drowned spawning down there. I guess I'd better quickly check the perimeter of the village as well, because yep, he's hiding back here. I have no idea how he got over there. Probably one of these areas where I built up the wall in an area where they could walk over. Yeah, he's probably just like parkoured his way up this and then hopped over the side or something like that. That's annoying. I really wanted to add in some nice touches to the decoration of this village, but no, it's probably just this. Let's take that out. Unfortunate in terms of a design perspective, but I guess I could build the perimeter wall like 1 block higher and avoid issues like that in future. There we go. Montague should now be back at his station if he's found it. Yep, he's just wandered straight over there. Brilliant. Well, welcome back, my friend. I'm sorry I let you outside the wall. Hopefully that won't happen again. And as you can see, the weaponsmith has now refilled that coal trade he had before, and we can probably get him up to close enough to the next level, I guess. Not quite a journeyman yet, but there is still a little way to go. I've been taking out the zombie pigmen as they come through this nether portal. In fact, it's probably not a good idea to let them out of the nether portal in the first place, and I've cordoned it off with a few fence gates here, mostly to stop the villagers from going through, and the cat seems to have followed me over here for some reason. Yeah, mostly to stop the villagers from going through, but also to stop zombie pigmen from getting out. Because much like other zombies, zombie pigmen will actually scare villagers and they'll run away. And when they are scared, they basically forget everything else about what they're doing. They forget work, they forget whether or not they're going to gossip, and they run for safety, whether that's their houses, whether that's just away from the zombie as far as possible. And thanks to the fact that the zombie AI from zombie pigmen has basically been copied and pasted over, they are scared of zombie pigmen even if the pigmen aren't aggressive towards them. So it's usually a good idea to keep any kind of zombie or zombie pigmen interference away from your villagers. A zombie might be a good target for attracting iron golems though, because iron golems will aggro on a zombie that they can see in range and will walk towards it, and you could even use that as a trap to lure them into a very low-yield iron farm. Because right now we have 5 golems patrolling this otherwise incredibly safe village. We don't need to worry too much about them being around for the villagers' protection, and so just placing a zombie up here, perhaps? Oh, there's another cat. Placing a zombie up here that they could find themselves attracted over to and then just lure them into a lava trap in the same way that we used to do with our old iron farm. It might be possible to just churn through iron golems that way. With a village of this size, it really wouldn't take them long to generate another one, and then you'd probably have an iron farm that got you 3 or 4 ingots every so often, every couple of days maybe. It wouldn't be a match for the old iron farm designs that you could get like lots and lots of iron per hour, but we'll get into one of those in future that's looking pretty promising. For now, all of these villagers are finding their beds, and you know what? I've started to feel a little bit sorry for them having to camp out under the stars like this. It feels a little bit too regimented, it doesn't feel all that great, and so Montague is finding my bed, finally. Welcome back, old friend. We are going to make some houses for these guys at long last. It's been too long without actually having proper houses for them, and I feel like now we've spent a bit of time with these guys, we could do it justice. So I'm going to go to a time lapse, and we're going to make some houses. Welcome back, folks. I hope you enjoyed the time-lapse, and I'm quite happy with the way some of these houses have come together. They look kind of nice here in the jungle biome. However, I've encountered a few issues with it, not the least of which is that we have tons of iron golems now. So I'm probably going to have to come up with some way of humanely disposing of these guys because they are a plague on this village right now. And I gather a few other people have said the same thing, that iron golems spawn really frequently in their village. And it may just be that the villagers don't really have much else to gossip about because I have been doing a pretty lax amount of trading with them. I haven't been doing all that much trade while I focused on developing the village slightly. But what I have come to, the conclusion I have come to is that building houses for them is not nearly as effective when it comes to getting them into bed. And while that's not something they need to do to refresh their trades, it is part of their routine and is, in theory, the safest thing for them to do in the event of a raid. And the idea behind some of this was that eventually I would get the village to a state where I thought it was protected enough against raids and we would try one out here. However, you will notice as the sun starts to go down and the villagers start to make their way back to their beds, a lot of them are having real difficulty pathfinding to the beds that I've placed in these houses. And each of them, each floor of that house has 2 beds in it. This house here has 1 bed, and this house here on the right has 2. You will start to see them all claiming the beds as night continues to fall. But then stuff like this starts happening, where the villagers just can't find their way to the beds, whether that's because there are slabs in the way, or maybe because they just try and find the shortest path from where they were standing previously to the bed. This guy here seems to have found it, and sometimes they can even claim a bed through the wall and actually get into bed through the wall, but you will find stuff like this happening all too often. There are 3 villagers just standing up here trying to get into the bed, or at least to the other beds that are over there in the large field kind of area, through this house. And that's a problem. And until we distribute the beds over here a bit more evenly, it feels like that will continue to be a problem. Now, this bed here is completely unoccupied. Let me just quickly check the beds that are up here in the houses. We've got one guy who has glitched through a slab over here, so that's not super promising. Here we have 4 villagers trying to get into the same bed. This flat up here is completely vacant, and it seems like they're having a really difficult time with it. So if I want this place to be a little bit more... Oh, we've got campfires in here, by the way, for a bit of atmosphere. I quite like that. But if I want this place to be functional as a village, it seems like a slightly better approach to finding them shelter in terms of these beds is to make a more open area. Basically, to have an area that's kind of like this, but enclosed inside. Make it a little bit more like open plan, I guess, in terms of a living space, because building the kind of houses that I feel like makes sense for a village, and even the kinds of houses that you see in naturally generated villages around the world, seems a little bit unlikely to be the most productive way of getting them into their beds. And as you can see, the iron golems aren't really helping with that. They are waking up these villagers every now and again by pushing them out of bed, and then they just kind of stand there not entirely sure what to do. So I think we'll have to take a different approach, and that's why I paused the time-lapse, having only done a couple of things around here. But I have got some more farmers now. We planted an area of wheat and potatoes and carrots over here so that there are a couple more composters around for the farmers to use. And of course, they are summarily trampling all of the crops, but hopefully this area should stay nice and well lit, even though I've made a couple of changes to it. And in the meantime, we have a few more farmers that we can trade crops with. So hopefully that will be nice and productive. I've also got a couple more lecterns in this little library area over here that I built, and that's going to provide us with a couple more librarians. I think it even re-rolled one of the existing librarian's trades because I hadn't done much trading with him already. But yeah, I think maybe in tomorrow's episode we'll need to do something about the iron golem problem, and maybe we'll try and work on some slightly more, I guess, like open plan villager housing, just so that these guys will actually be able to find their beds at night. But that's going to be it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you have, don't forget to leave a like on this episode, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.